Hey guys, what's going on? Megan here. Why do black people build muscle faster? That's a question that I get so much. It's never gonna go away. And there are different theories, right? Some saying, hey, it's a myth. It's not real. It doesn't exist. It's just an illusion. Some are saying it must be because of slavery. That's probably one of my most hated theories because I'm gonna show you guys how it's complete nonsense. They're like, hey, it's because of selective breeding and during slavery, blah blah blah, which has been debunked so many times, but I'll go over that in a video. Some saying, "Oh, it's just hard work." The reason why black people dominate sports and mainly fast twitch related sports, just because they just work harder. Which again, load of BS. And I'm black. And obviously, some say, "Hey, it's just the BBC genetics." So what's the answer? What's the answer? Well, really, it's a combination of many factors. It's somewhere in the middle. All right, let's get to it. So first, is it true? Is it true? Do black people actually have a genetic advantage when it comes to building muscle or, obviously, fast twitch related sports? For those of you guys who don't know, you obviously have slow twitch and fast twitch muscles. The ones that grow bigger from training, obviously, your fast twitch muscles. By now, everyone should know this. Fast twitch muscles is what we're really referring to, not the slow twitch ones. So, do black people have an advantage in that field? All right. Well, let's see. First, let's look at sprints, right? The 100-meter dash, which is the sport that is the most related to fast twitch, muscle performance, right? You're not gonna win the 100-meter dash if you have, shitty fast twitch genes. And obviously, it's dominated by black people, right? It's dominated by West African descendants, um, especially Jamaicans, right? So look at the statistics, right? The top 10 fastest men on the planet, as far as the 100-meter dash goes, are black. The top 10 fastest women are black. If you look at the 10-second barrier, right, trying to beat the 100-meter dash in less than 10 seconds, I think the first white man who actually do it was in 2010, and it's been broken in 1968. But obviously, so pretty much from 1968 to 2010, every person who broke that record, I think it's 71 people who did it. 71 people ran the 100-meter dash under 10 seconds, and 70 of them were black, which is insane. The other person is Aboriginal, which is another nigger, right? So pretty much 100% of the people who broke the 10-second barrier, before 2010 were black men, right? So obviously there's something going on here. You can't tell me that, oh man, they just run so much harder and they just train so much harder than everybody else, right? You think Asians don't train hard? You think white people don't train hard? I mean, even as a black person, you could look at the results and be like, whoa, something is going on here. Let's look at the NBA, right? 70% of the NBA is black. The top 10 greatest basketball players of all time, only one guy on that list, no matter who you ask, only one guy on that list is white. My man Larry Bird. I love Larry Bird. So 90% of the top 10 greatest players of all time in basketball are black. Is that a coincidence? You mean to tell me that they just work harder than everybody else? They just work harder than every other race? That's obviously not the case. Next, the NFL. Again, about 70%, depending on where you're looking at it, but about 70% of the NFL is black. Why do you think that? Especially, and let's focus on the cornerback position, which is obviously the position that requires the most speed, the most fast twitch muscle engagement. It's dominated by black people. Like, why? Why do you think that is? So obviously something is going on here, right? People didn't just come up with this notion out of nowhere. Like I said, later on in the video, I'm going to explain why. But let's keep going. All right, bodybuilding, right? Bodybuilding, the epitome of muscle growth, the epitome of fast twitch dominance. You're not going to win a bodybuilding show unless you have some big ass fast twitch muscles, right? Dominated by blacks for the most part, right? I mean, just look at who has the most Olympia titles. You have Lee Haney, at 8 Olympia titles, right? You have second place, well, actually not second place, but tied with Lee Haney is Ronnie Coleman with 8 Mr. Olympia titles. And in third place, you have 7 Mr. Olympia titles by Phil Heath, and he's tied with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So the top 3 with the most titles are black. Is that a coincidence, right? And then you have, so you have Lee Haney, you have Ronnie Coleman, you have Phil Heath, then you have Arnold, then you have Dorian Yates at 6. Right. So is it a coincidence? You mean to tell me that they just train harder than everybody else? They just have better, more dedication, better drugs? Nah. Right. There's obviously a genetic component at work here. Let's look at, and then again, this is up for debate, right? Boxing, tennis, things like that. That's pretty much up for debate. But if you say boxing, most of the time people would think Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson. Tennis. When you say tennis, whose name comes to mind? Serena Williams. Serena Williams is one of the most decorated tennis athletes. If you look at gymnasts, the best gymnast in the world right now, as far as records go, is Simone Biles. She's just killing the gymnast. So what is going on here? Now, of course, it's not every sport. You have hockey. There's no, black people don't fucking play hockey. If you go to the projects, you go to the hood, you're not gonna see fucking, hockey stadiums and shit. So, swimming, right? They don't dominate swimming. In fact, it's weird because most African Americans actually can't swim, and I'm not gonna go to the reasons why, the ethnic reasons why, whatever. They don't dominate powerlifting. They don't dominate strongman competitions. That's mainly Northern Europeans, and black people don't dominate weightlifting. That's mainly Eurasians. Asians and some parts of Europe. So it's not every fast twitch dominant sport, but it's a big, big chunk, big enough to raise an eyebrow. But now the question is why? Why is this happening? Now, before we get there, first of all, beware. It's not all black people. That's why I put black people in quotes, right? It's not all black people that have this ability to just dominate the majority of fast twitch sports. It's mainly West African descendants, right? So you see, I have it here. It's mainly West Africans and their descendants. Their descendants meaning anyone, if you're an African American, from Brazil, Southern America, the islands, Jamaicans, even Puerto Ricans, Dominicans. If you're a descendant, of West Africans, that applies to you, right? So it's not all blacks. It's mainly people that are descendants or live in this region right here, right? And I have a lot of stories about this, guys. Especially if you're from Ghana, Nigeria, right? Mainly this region here. Those guys are some of the jackest motherfuckers I've ever seen. Remember, guys, I've lived on 3 continents. I've had the opportunity at a young age to live on multiple continents. So I've seen genetics come and go. I've seen every kind of genetic you could think about. And as far as West Africa goes, Nigerians, people from Ghana, and some people from even Cameroon, right? So it's not just here, some here as well. These guys are jacked than a motherfucker, right? They respond to training like crazy, right? And obviously, because of the slave trade, if you're an African American, well, you could trace your roots here, right? Take the fucking DNA test. You see what I'm talking about. Oh, and a funny story about Nigerians. So, back when I was in New York, right, one of my best friends was Toby. His name was Toby, right? And this motherfucker, man. To this day, I still can't stand this guy. Like, I hope he's watching this video, Toby, because I still hate you for that. Him and his 2 brothers. So it was him, Toby, Femi, and his brother Kola, right? These guys, just to show you how crazy Nigerian genetics are, these guys could jump like motherfuckers, right? And they did zero training for that. They were just super, super, super genetically gifted. I remember, first of all, Toby's gonna hate me saying that, but he used to suck at ball. He used to suck at ball, right? And I'm not surprised because he's a LeBron fan. But anyway, but everyone will always pick him and his brothers on their team. Why? For rebounds. Because if you missed a shot, best believe that rebound was gonna get called by either Toby or his 2 brothers. These guys jump so fucking high. All 3 of them. They had a 4th brother, but I never played basketball with him, so I don't know how good his genetics are. But all 3 of them had amazing, amazing jumping ability. Right? They jump so fucking high. And we used to hate it. We used to be like, dude, why the fuck did you jump so high? They never train. And the funny thing is, because I have shitty genetics, I used to go out at night and I used to put on ankle weights. And I used to think, hey, maybe if I practice at night when everybody's sleeping, I practice with ankle weights, maybe I'm going to jump high one day, Never fucking worked. And these motherfuckers never trained their calves, never did anything that's remotely close to training for vertical jump. And they just jump high. All 3 of them. All 3 brothers. And it doesn't stop there. Because think about it, to jump high, you obviously need, fast twitch muscles in your legs, right? These guys put on muscle so fucking fast. I wish I could find some pictures when we first started training at CSI. Oh my God. Toby, Kola, and Femi. All 3 of them. You think it's a coincidence, guys? These guys put on muscle so fast. I could not believe it. I remember Toby had shoulders that would just bulge out after just weeks and months of training. And I should be like, what the fuck is going on with you? I should be so bad because I'm like, dude, you jump higher than me in basketball, right? So I can't even compete with you there. And then when we start training, keep in mind, I was the guy who was obsessed with building muscle. You know, so I was the guy forcing him to come to the gym. I was like, Toby, come on, man, let's go to the gym. Come on, come on, come on, let's get sore. And he was always like, yeah, whatever. He wasn't really into it, but he would grow like a motherfucker. Right? Same thing with his brother, man. Cola was so jacked, six pack, everything. So you want to talk about genetics? Trust me, I've seen it all, guys. But yeah, Toby, if you're watching this video, fuck you. I still hate you for that, man. Like, And there are tribes. Same thing. There are tribes in Africa, that are just amazingly gifted. These guys, just the hunters or the Senegalese wrestlers, the guys who do the drums, just insane physical development. In fact, a subscriber sent me this picture. You guys probably saw the documentary. The documentary came out years ago. I completely forgot about this one, but subscriber sent me the picture. Go watch this video. Look how jacked this guy is, and they're from a tribe in West Africa as well. And keep in mind, these guys they don't have the nutrition that we have. They don't have access to the equipment that we have. They just have those BBC genetics. But it's not all West Africans also, right? It's not all West Africans. Again, I always use myself as an example, right? I'm fucking West African, and I grew up being known as one of the guys with the worst genetics. In fact, when I was a kid, my friends used to laugh at me all the fucking time, because we used to go out and play soccer, and we had to take our shirts off, because we didn't have jerseys. When we were playing soccer outside, it was either shirts or skins, right? And I always hated being on the opposite team. Whenever I was picked to play skins, I had to take my shirt off. I hated that shit, right? Because I had some of the worst genetics. And everyone used to laugh at me. My African friends used to laugh at me because they were like, dude, how are you West African and your genetics suck so bad? So it's not all West Africans. Next, it's also not exclusive to Africa, guys. And you're going to see, I'm going to go into the details, whatever. Yes, the vast majority of those with good fast twitch genetics, right, are going to come from here. But you're also going to see some outliers. Some Europeans have that, right? Some Asians have that, right? So don't think this is only exclusive to Africa. Don't think, like only, no. It's spread out throughout the world. It's just there's a higher frequency among Africans, West Africans. Now, why? Let's see. Reason number one, right, is natural selection, right? You can't talk about genetics without mentioning natural selection, right? And obviously, by now you guys should know what natural selection is. If you're too young, if you're a 16-year-old guy who skipped biology class and you don't know what natural selection is, pretty much your environment decides which genes are going to activate, right, and which genes are going to be passed on. The simplest example, the one that we hear all the time in biology class, is the camouflage example, right? If you're a white mouse, right, living in a region where the ground is white, well, you have a camouflage advantage, right? So you're going to pass on your genes much faster because owls and eagles are not going to spot you that often. But if you're a black mouse in a region where the ground is light or white, you're going to get shit snapped up 24/7. Every time you go out to, walk around and chill with the homies, an eagle is going to come out of nowhere and just snap your shit up, right? Because you're easier to spot. So over time, if you come, over time, the vast majority of the rats who are going to be on that, in that region where the ground is white are going to be white, right? And the same thing, applies to, a region where the ground is darker, right? If the ground is darker, then most of the rats that live there are going to be dark because they blend in, right? So natural selection. So that doesn't mean that the ground is making people white or black. It just means the environment helps decide which genes are going to be passed on. So natural selection plays a huge role as far as why black people just have those genetics. Second reason is African diversity. For those of you guys who don't know, there is so much. In fact, there's more genetic diversity in Africa than the rest of the world combined. Right? You ask any biologist, any geneticist, they'll tell you that there's more genetic diversity in Africa than the rest of the world combined. And keep in mind, there's only about population of Africa is no more than 1 billion. There's about 1.2 billion people in Africa, right? Yeah, there's more genetic diversity there than the other 6 billion people in the world combined, right? Which is insane. And of course, it makes sense, right? Because life originated from Africa. So obviously, you're going to have the most genetic variations there. So what does that have to do with black people putting on muscle fast? Well, think about it. every genetic, every gene you could think about, every variation of any gene you could think about, you're gonna find that in Africa. Think about it. The tallest people in the world are in Africa. In fact, they're in East Africa, right? There's a tribe, just tall motherfuckers. Even the women, I think the average height is like 6 feet or some shit. Even the women are tall as fuck, right? And again, that's obviously, due to natural selection. It's very hot near the equator. You guys know, again, the hotter it is, you're gonna have longer limbs and things like that. So the tallest tribe is found in Africa. The shortest tribe, the pygmies, right? And pygmy motherfuckers, I believe they're somewhere around Congo, somewhere around Central Africa, right? They're the shortest people on the planet. Well, guess what? You're gonna find those in Africa, right? So every gene variation you could think about is gonna be found there. So it's no coincidence that the people who, the most jacked motherfuckers will also come from Africa. But guess what? The skinniest people are also from Africa, right? So it's not, don't see it as, oh, why is this so puzzling? No, it's just common fucking sense. Next, West Africans have a higher proportion of fast twitch fibers. Why is that? Again, I don't want to go into the details, but if you grew up in West Africa, you know the story, right? It's mainly based on malaria. It's because of malaria. We have West Africans have, on average, lower hemoglobin, right? On average, they have sickle cell, right? They have the highest cases of sickle cell trait, and sickle cell anemia. And it's mainly back to natural selection. It's because of malaria, right? I'm not going to go into the details. Like I said, you should have learned that in school anyway. But long story short, malaria ravages through Africa. In fact, 90% of malaria-related deaths are from West Africa, right? From Africa. It's if you grew up in West Africa, you terrified at just the fucking term malaria. Now, of course, there's vaccines now, and as long as you have access to healthcare, you should be fine. But it destroyed the African population. So, how does malaria work? So you have this fuck ass mosquito. I hate this fucking mosquito because I had malaria so many times growing up. It's insane. It's funny, when I came to America, I moved to the U.S. when I was 11, and I had to learn English here, so it took me a while to adapt. But I was amazed that people didn't even know what the fuck malaria was, and I was like, what? Like in Africa, you have malaria like every other month. But anyway, this mosquito, the female mosquito, pretty much has to feed its young. So what it does is, when she's pregnant, she needs blood. Usually they go to animals, but in West Africa, the mosquito species that are there, they love human blood, right? So they come, they suck your blood, and they inject the fucking bacteria that's responsible for malaria. Now, what the bacteria does is it needs your red blood cells to multiply, right? So it goes to your liver first, and then it infects your red blood cells, and it multiplies. Now, normally, if you have low hemoglobin, which is what most West Africans have and their descendants, and if you have a sickle cell trait, well, you have issues with your red blood cells, right? And that's gonna hinder the ability of the bacteria to multiply. So a disease that normally will snap your shit up ends up being an advantage if there's a lot of malaria, right? Because the malaria parasite can't spread. But at the same time, right, because you have low hemoglobin, your red blood cells are not optimized, whatever, you have a higher proportion of fast twitch muscles. It's just common sense, guys, because you guys remember slow twitch muscles, those are your oxidative fibers. They need a lot of blood, a lot of oxygen to contract, whereas your fast twitch muscles, that's the reason why they're, they have that white color, right? They don't have a lot of oxygen. In fact, they do anaerobic respiration. They don't need oxygen. So the people that had a sickle cell trait, right, also had obviously, higher proportion of fast twitch fibers. But it's hilarious. It's hilarious because we used to have so many theories as kids. We should be like, man, like, oh, it's that time of the year again. I have malaria, and then fucking Yannick over there never has it. And we never knew why. Until we got older. But yeah. So long story short, West Africans. That's why West Africans have a higher proportion of fast fiber. And books were written about this, guys. This is not new. This is not a theory. This is not bro science. Books were written about this. Again, if you go to West Africa, everyone knows that. It's literally like night and day. People that have sickle cell trait, these guys are so immune to malaria. And when they do catch malaria, they recover so fast. So obviously, with the slave trade, a lot of African Americans, obviously descendants of West Africans, so that's why they also have, low hemoglobin and sickle cell trait. Not sickle cell anemia. If you have sickle cell anemia, you just fucked, right? Sickle cell trait, you're right there in the middle. So if you have a higher prevalence of fast twitch muscles, you could thank this fuck ass mosquito. All right, next, the actinin gene. Black people have the best combination of the actinin gene. For those who are not familiar with that gene, pretty much it's in your fast twitch fibers. It codes for a protein that's in your fast twitch fibers, right? And it makes your fast twitch fibers produce more force, contract more powerfully, right? So it leads to more speed. It protects you from muscle damage, so you can recover quicker from workouts. In short, It's a gene that's mainly, it's a protein that's mainly found in fat switch fibers. Now, you can have three versions of this gene, right? You can have the RR version, which is, because you guys know you inherit two copies of a gene from your parents, right? One from your mom, one from your dad, right? The actinin gene has two versions, right? You have the R version and the X version. The R version means it's fine, nothing is wrong. Your body's gonna make that protein just fine. And obviously, the X version means it's fucked up, right? It's a mutation that hinders your body's ability to make that gene. Now, obviously, since you inherit two copies of a gene, from your parents, right? So one from your dad, one from your mom. If you get the R from your mom and the R from your dad, then you're fine. You have RR, you're good to go. Your body's gonna make actinin 3. Your fat muscle is gonna be powerful. It's gonna help you with speed, contraction, boom, all that good shit. If you get the R from your mom, the X from your dad, or vice versa, you're still good, right? You're not RR, you're not an RR motherfucker, right? But at least you have you have half of it, right? So your body can still make the gene, just not as much as obviously the RR motherfucker. Now, if you inherit the X from your mom and the other X from your dad, or vice versa, right? You fucked, right? Because now your body can't make actinin 3. You're not gonna notice it in your everyday life, but at the elite level, that's definitely gonna come in, right? So because you have access, you have no actinin 3, so you don't have the advantage that protein provides as far as force production and speed and things like that. Now, what does this have to do with black people? Well, guess what? On average, 18% of the world population have the XX version, right? The fucked up version. 18% of the world population have it. I think white people are about 19 to 20%. About 20% of them have the fucked up version. Asians, it's as high as 25%, right? So one in every 4 Asian has it. For West Africans, it's under 1%. Let that sink in for a minute. Under 1%. So less than 1% of West Africans have the fucked up version of the actinin 3 gene, right? So 99% of West Africans have the good version of that gene, which is insane. Because again, the global average is like at least 18% should have it. If you look at Jamaicans who dominate sprinting events, same thing. About 2% of the Jamaican population have it. If you look at sprinters, in fact, if you look at sprinters, there's not a single sprinter in the world who has the XX version. You guys can look it up. All the top sprinters in the world, they all have R, RR or RX. Now, if you have XX, you're gonna dominate in endurance events, right? But don't even waste your time as far as winning the 100-meter dash goes. So that is one of the primary reasons why black people dominate sprinting and sports that require a lot of faster things. Their actinin 3 profile is the best out of the entire fucking world. Anyway, next up, myostatin. Again, sub-Saharan Africans, so West African, Central Africa, whatever, they have the highest mutations of myostatin. Now, they're not missing the myostatin gene, right? But they have the highest, cases of myostatin polymorphism, right? So they have the highest variations of the myostatin gene. So that gives them an advantage, again, when it comes to building muscle. Next, the androgen receptor. It's another thing that you guys should know. Black people also have a very, very high sensitivity to androgen receptors, right? That's why a lot of them blow up so fast on steroids. That's also why they have the highest rates of prostate cancer. Prostate cancer is mainly a function of a very sensitive androgen receptor, right? So very sensitive to androgen receptors. And obviously, you guys know the androgen receptor is the #1 predictor of muscle growth, right? If you had to pick just one thing that decides how much muscle you could put on or how fast you could put on muscle, it's obviously your androgen receptor, and obviously interacts with myostatin and things like that. Which is why nucleus overload works so fucking well, because when you increase the amount of satellite cells in your muscles, the amount of nuclei, you're also increasing your androgen receptors, right? Next, anatomy, right? Again, being next to the equator, right? People that, the fact that West Africans have evolved next to the equator gives them a huge advantage as far as, the anatomy goes. For those who are not familiar with how geographical location affects your anatomy, animals and humans who evolved near the equator have longer limbs, like I mentioned earlier, helps you with heat management, right? They have narrower hips, and all those things make them really good at sports. That's why. Now, what does that have to do with building muscle fast? Well, think about it for a second. Well, if you're naturally good at sports because of your anatomy, you're gonna start playing sports from an early age, which is the case with most black people that start playing sports from a very early age, and they accumulate a lot of satellite cells, a lot of nuclei. And when they start bodybuilding, right? If you're familiar with my nucleus overload theory, which is now proven, so it's no longer theory, um, they accumulate a lot of satellite cells from playing sports, from playing soccer, playing basketball, whatever. So when they start lifting, of course they're gonna put on muscle faster than the average person who didn't work out, right? They have more satellite cells, more nuclei. Remember, satellite cells are upregulated from physical activity, especially if you're doing it daily. That's why, like I always say, people who used to train at traps daily, when they start bodybuilding, their traps blew up. People who used to play soccer or used to bike ride a lot, their legs blew up when they start bodybuilding. So it's the same effect here. Most black people are genetically have a genetic advantage when it comes to anatomy, and that puts them in situations where they're playing sports from a very, very young age. So when they start training, a lot of the growth you see is mainly as a response of the high satellite cell content accumulated. Next, sunlight. Obviously, watch my video on vitamin D. That's why I'm so big on sunlight and vitamin D, right? I hate calling it vitamin D because it's a fucking hormone. It's not a vitamin, right? Your body makes it. Your body doesn't make vitamins. It was called vitamin D by mistake because it was the fourth one discovered, but it's a hormone. I'm not going to go into details. Watch my videos. I made a 30-minute video about that, but I explain why I'm so big on sunlight, why I always tell people make sure you get enough sunlight. But in short, the benefits of vitamin D, it's not just for calcium. Yes, calcium is important, right? Calcium gives you stronger bones, and obviously your muscles can't even contract without calcium. So obviously, if you're vitamin D deficient, your muscles are gonna suck ass, your bones are gonna suck ass. But people keep forgetting that vitamin D has receptors throughout the entire body. Your muscle, your satellite cells have vitamin D receptors. So vitamin D is amazing at not just retaining calcium, but at building muscle. In fact, it is a prerequisite for building muscle. It lowers myostatin. It increases your proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers, on and so forth. And guess what? West Africans are right there near the equator, right? So they're getting plenty of sunlight. And remember, your number one source of vitamin D is the sun. There was no supplements back then. When we evolved, you know, eons ago, there was no vitamin D supplements, right? And you were not going to get it from your diet. There was no fortified cereals in Africa or whatever. So you had to get it from the sun. That's why the sun is the number one source of vitamin D, right? And in fact, that's why black people have dark skin, right? As a mechanism to prevent that skin damage from excessive UVB radiation. Now, the motherfuckers who left Africa, right, went to Northern Europe, Asia, whatever, they had to evolve white skin because guess what? There's not enough UVB radiation the further away you go from the equator. That's why white skin evolved. But long story short, the fact that West Africans evolved and adapted near the equator plays a huge role in, their ability to put on muscle and the genetic ability to obviously have strong bones and be good at sports and all that bullshit. And next you have culture, right? You also have to look at the fact that, it's not just genetics, it's also your environment, culture. Black people just, put a big emphasis on sports performance, I mean, even in the projects, if you show up and say, hey, I have hey, I want to be an engineer, everyone looks at you funny. They're like, what do you mean you want to be an engineer, right? Usually in most black communities, and again, not all black communities, but in most lower income black communities, it's all about sports. You either gonna play sports, so basketball, NBA or NFL. You're gonna be a rapper or a fucking gang member, right? Those are the three things that are fucking worship, and that's one of my biggest issues with the black community. It's like reinforcing, we're literally putting all of our youngsters in situations where they only have three things to choose from. Now, of course, things are changing. We're in 2020 now, and things are changing. But culture plays a huge role. When you grow up seeing that Michael Jordan is, on top of the world, that makes more black kids want to join sports. When you grow up seeing that, I don't know, the best bodybuilder is black, that inspires you to try bodybuilding. So culture plays a huge role. And you also have socioeconomic factors. Oh, another thing you have to think about when you talk about culture is sexual selection, right? Not only you have natural selection, deciding what genes are going to get passed on, but you also have sexual selection, right? What women want, what women like, right? And like I said, if you grew up in the hood, right? If you play sports, Jesus Christ, bitches were all over you, right? So the guy who's jacked or who's good at, I don't know, playing football or, is a good point guard, is a good running back, whatever, he's not going to have any issues passing on his fucking genes. So that just perpetuates the whole, good gene thing. It just keeps getting passed on and on and on. It's not going to die out anytime soon. And last but not least, you also have the illusion, right? When you have dark skin, you just look bigger, right? The darker your skin is, the more your definition shows. That's why bodybuilders tan, right? That's why even the whitest bodybuilders have to put on a tan before they go on the show. So you also have the illusion factor. So in short, these are the 10 reasons why black people, in quote, put on muscle so damn fast. All right, so conclusion, it's a combination of genetics and society, right? It's a combination of environmental factors, socioeconomic status. I mean, think about it. There's a lot of white people who have really good genetics for building muscle, but are probably lawyers or engineers or working as doctors or some shit, you know? So you gotta look at, opportunities as well. The more opportunities is offered to a group of people, the more the genetic pool is going to be spread out. And finally, your genetics are good enough, right? Do not use this video as an excuse to say, hey, I'm not West African descendant or whatever. So there's no hope in me building muscle. I just showed you that it's not every West African. So don't use that as an excuse. Most people have genetics good enough to put on muscle. In fact, if you take the average person, if that person maximizes their genetic potential, they're going to look better than the most genetically gifted West African. Okay? So don't use that as an excuse. In fact, most people have good enough genetics. It's just their training sucks ass, their nutrition sucks ass, right? And once again, I'm a perfect example of that. My genetics were trash. After 2 years of lifting, I still look like shit. And I thought, hey, maybe this thing is not for me, right? But once I started doing full body workouts back in 2012, once I started focusing more on high frequency, nucleus overload, all that stuff, I grew like a fucking weed. Go look at my videos back from 2012 to 2013. That was years after my noob gains were over. But yet I was able to put on so much muscle because I found out what works, not just for me, but for the majority of natty motherfuckers, right? Which is, again, training more frequently. So most people train like trash. They eat like trash, and they say, "Oh, I just don't have the good enough genetics." No, your genetics are good enough. They're not top tier Ronnie Coleman genetics, but they're good enough. You just gotta fix your training, gotta fix your nutrition. All right, guys, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell. Visit my website and grab a copy of my ebook and training program. Go to www.team3dalpha.com and don't forget to use the 40% off coupon code Nucleus Overload.